listen to me. I got that flavor, I know you're dying to feed. I ain't no dancer, just got some hip in my feet. Now throw your hands up. Ooh, you bring the lighter, I got the fuse. You make a fire, I'll add the fuel. Follow my lady, just watch your shoes. Gotta turn the heat up to get this cool.
Who you know who looking like this for real? Who you know who looking like this? Who you know who looking like this for real? Who you know who looking like this? Who you know who looking like this for real? Who you know who looking like this? Who you know who looking like this for real? Who you know who looking like this?
Boys and girls, ladies and gents, welcome to another episode of Clutch Conversations. It's your boy Mike. We back at you one more again. No, we're not live tonight. This is a pre-recorded episode. We're coming back for round 2 of some Joe Exotic. We got Michael Robinson, who is Joe Exotic's press secretary for the Joe Exotic presidential campaign. We're chatting with him tonight, so this is going to be really dope. But first and foremost, I want to give my shout out to my lovely wife, Takara. Really appreciate everything you do. She's not controlling any comments or anything tonight because obviously we're pre-recorded, but definitely want to always show love to my lovely wife, Takara. Y'all make sure y'all show us some love in the comments. Really appreciate y'all stopping by and showing the channel some love. Be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hook smash that notification bell so you can get notifications each and every time we drop a video on the channel. Definitely really appreciate the support. Thanks to everyone who checks us out on the audio only podcast platforms. As you know, Clutch Conversations is available on all major podcasting platforms. That's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. So definitely go check us out on your favorite podcasting platform. And when you're there, please be sure to follow, rate, review, leave us some feedback. We really appreciate the feedback. We definitely appreciate the support. Speaking of support, if you're involved in this reptile hobby in any shape, form, or fashion, make sure you are supporting US Art and US Art Florida. The link for both of those organizations are in the description of this video. So definitely go through, slide through, show them some support. Get your membership if you can get a membership. If you can throw an extra donation, whatever you can do, spread the word. Just make sure everybody that you talk to is aware of US Art and US Art Florida, and make sure they understand that it's 2 separate organizations. We got US Art, and then Florida has its very own US Art, which is US Art Florida, 2 separate 501c6 organizations. Make sure you support them both. Do what you can. Again, spread the word, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. And again, the link for both organizations are in the description of this video. So definitely go check them out. Also want to do a shout out to our sponsors. We're going to kick this sponsor segment and pay some bills, and then we're going to get to the show.
Big dreams start in small towns. Small Town Xotics is a family-ran business that specializes in high-quality ball python morphs, western hognoses, and select leopard geckos. They are proud members of US Art Florida, and the Orient Society. Stay connected with Small Town Xotics on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Witness their journey as they grow their business and showcase their animals to the world. Thank you, Small Town Xotics, for sponsoring the show.
Art comes in many forms. At Armless Angels, it comes to life. Every day at Reptile Lifeline begins with a promise of quality and commitment. We carefully select our ball pythons to offer you nothing but the very best. Our quality isn't rushed, it's enjoyed, just like a moment of peace by the water. That's why we've chosen to focus on the long game, working projects such as Pied, Clown, Desert Ghost, Rainbow, and Sunset. At the end of the day, we're fired up about quality. That's the Reptile Lifeline promise.
Hey man, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good, man. Just out here,
Good.
obviously hanging out with the crew. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That is I would have to say that's definitely the most interesting backdrop that we've had on the show to date.
well,
Hands down.
I figured when you said, "Hey, come on, let's have a conversation," I thought there's no better place. I need to go out back and just hang out with the spiders for a little bit and
Absolutely.
share it with folks.
So you got how many? You got 3 spider monkeys?
We got 3 spider monkeys, and then I have 2 vervets. So vervets are, of course, they down there in Florida, man. They like you get South Florida. There's like whole communities of vervets that live wild in Florida now. So
Oh wow.
yeah. There's like population. There's little islands and places like that. When you get down like near Broward County and Miami-Dade and all that area like that, where folks, just like the Everglades, right? They let them go, and then they just happen to be able to survive. So it's wild. Last time I was in Miami, we got into a parking garage, and there was a whole troop of monkeys that came up, and I was like, man, I feel like I'm visiting South America right now or something. Like it's wacky.
Snow is about the only thing you don't find in Florida.
Right? Exactly.
We rarely have any snow outside of that. Everything else is pretty much fair game.
Yep. Bingo.
So cool, man.
Bingo.
Before we get too deep into it, for those that don't know you, could you introduce yourself? Give them a little bit of information about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Michael Robinson. The best way I've always just kind of described myself, I mean, obviously animals are a big part of my life, working in exotics and everything. But I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been a business owner for over 20 years. I currently own one of the largest screen printing and merch companies in the Southeast United States. So we make merch for probably every band you go out. If you go to concerts and that kind of stuff, bands and businesses and that kind of stuff. So we create merch for that. So I live my whole life in t-shirts because we do t-shirts for a living. So, that's kind of my world. But exotics and animals in particular have just been a huge part of my life. I'm a veterinary school dropout. I got third-year vet school. It said, I don't really want to be a doctor. I just want to do life with animals, right? So we obviously have built a big life around the animals. And currently, though, just kind of the track of life, I am serving right now as the press secretary and really kind of the face and proxy for Joe Exotic in his 2024 presidential campaign. Joe's a great friend of mine. Obviously, the exotics world is not that big, and depending on the type of animals you work with and whatnot, you cross paths at some point. So I love Joe. He's a great friend. And so I've spent a lot of time these last few months really speaking on Joe's behalf, speaking for the presidential campaign, and being there to support. And it's not just supporting Joe. One thing that's really important to me, I'm sure we can talk about, is really just supporting the rights of Americans, returning freedoms, those inalienable rights that we're guaranteed as Americans, and not just as Americans. It's just human beings, right? And so
Absolutely.
really protecting that, because a lot of that stuff has changed. Our nation has kind of forgotten the fact that we are not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. We've got this constitution that kind of protects those rights. It doesn't give us those rights. It protects those rights. Those rights are not something somebody gives us. We just have them for being. And so that's a big part of Joe's story. That's how Joe and I really have a deeper connection too, is just sharing those values. So here we are. I've spent a lot of time lately having these conversations, talking about why is Joe running for president? What's going on with Joe? And then, of course, just for America in general, right? To speak up for the rights and the future of what's happening in this country.
Absolutely. I definitely want to tap into all of that. So that's actually a great segue. So real quick, set the stage for us, right? So how did you meet Joe? How did that relationship develop? And how did you end up being the press secretary for the campaign?
Well, I actually do that in reverse, only because it's more interesting on the other side. How did I end up in this role? It's really interesting. Joe just said to me one day in a note, said, hey, if you're okay with it, I'm going to make you my press secretary. It wasn't even a question. It was more of a statement. And I was like, okay, I've spent a lot of my life on a public stage, spent a period of my life on television, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, public speaking and conversation just works for me. And but I met Joe. I met Joe through the exotics world. when you work with, and I've worked with sanctuaries all over the country, specifically with endangered species and really, higher end exotics, so tigers, chimpanzees, things that obviously people just don't have in general. Even sanctuaries don't have much of anymore. So because I've worked with those specific types of animals, worked with the zoological world, that kind of stuff, there was no way I wasn't crossing paths with Joe well before Tiger King. Everybody knows Joe, of course, and the character of Joe Exotic from Tiger King. But I knew Joe as an eccentric, fun, incredible human being who ran this really great operation in Oklahoma. And I just really had a lot of respect for him because Joe's heart was always like, sure, if it needs help, I'll take it. Joe was never the type like, I don't know if I can afford it. I don't know if we'll just make it work, and that's the way I kind of operate. My mind thinks. And so, Joe and I connected from that. And then over the last few months in particular, as Joe started his campaign, as Joe's voice has gotten louder again as an individual, not just from a TV show or a Netflix series. But as he's really started to speak up, I've given Joe a lot of platform, with the work I do in exotics. We have, between all the critters I got running around here, I've got a pretty big following online. And so we've just kind of brought all that together. And Joe spent a lot of time with me in broadcast and interviews, things like that, because obviously Joe is in federal prison. So for those who are watching and don't know that, Joe is the first presidential candidate in U.S. history to run from federal prison. And I would say right now, currently, Joe would have to be the most notorious federal inmate in the entire system. So it's been an interesting thing to kind of watch that play out. But as his voice has gotten louder, what we've seen is the Department of Justice and kind of the powers that be have worked really hard, and more particularly in the last 2 weeks, to basically shut Joe up. So 2 weeks ago today, they put Joe in solitary confinement, not because of behavioral issues or any of that. So Joe has no access to his email, phone calls, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, solitary is exactly what they call it. So he's going, today's day number, really it's day number 15, but he's 2 weeks in to the solitary confinement. And this is where you kind of cross a barrier. The UN calls anything beyond the day number 15 cruel and unusual punishment. The last time they did this to Joe, they kept him there for 4 months. So right now, it's this really strange juxtaposition. I found myself on national television, all these places that I never thought I'd be, representing a presidential candidate, being kind of the face of a presidential campaign that isn't mine. But, my thing is, I'm here to fight for America, to fight for the people, to fight for Joe. And so here we are. I mean, that's the long and short of it. There's no magic moment other than Joe telling me you're going to be the press secretary. And I went, okay, that works.
So what was the official reason that they gave, for putting him in solitary confinement, or they never said anything at all?
No, so what we know really at this point, 2 weeks ago today, Joe was slated to go tonight with Kayleigh McEnany. And it was his first major public, appearance. It's via phone, but on national TV to talk about his campaign and talk about his particular case. Within an hour of announcing that and it being out on social media, they locked him up.
Oh, wow.
So by supposition, and, again, it's opinion because it's not, I can't say, out of integrity sake, it's not like I can say the Department of Justice said this or said that, but it's pretty apparent they've worked really hard to quiet him. To try and silence him. So, and it's I think it's really interesting is that Joe had really decided just prior to all of this that our campaign slogan for the presidential campaign would be, "You can't silence us." So we've taken that really seriously. So I've spent the last 2 weeks particularly going on as many, radio shows, broadcasts, television, all kinds of things like that, specifically with that in mind. Just because Joe can't speak doesn't mean we can't speak.
Absolutely. So can you give us an overview of Joe's presidential campaign? And obviously we've touched on what makes it unique in terms of him running from federal prison, but speak to some of the tenets and some of the platforms that you guys stand on.
Absolutely. Number one thing is giving America back to the people. It's all about giving this nation was founded by the people for the people, right? And that's the basis. We came here seeking independence, and it doesn't matter if you were part of the European settlers who showed up here a couple hundred years ago to do it, or your family immigrated here in the last 100 years or 10 years or 10 months for that matter. the reason for coming to America is this vision and this dream that this is a country for the people, by the people, right? And we've really moved away from that. And so it's a really big deal to Joe. It always has been. I mean, listen, Joe built his entire life, his kind of his kingdom, the Tiger King kingdom was built on those freedoms and that right to build your life how you want, to live how you want, to love who you want, to do the thing, build your business the way you want. And what's happening in this country is those things are being squeezed down and narrowed because everything's regulated. Thoughts are now being regulated. The way we post online is being regulated. The way we spend our money is being regulated. All of those things. And it's this overbearance of governance from the top down. And now personally, this is my opinion. I'm always open to discussion on these things. I think the greatest divide in America isn't amongst black and white, gay, straight, Christian, non-Christian, all those things that we like to put these big sticky notes out there about division. It's really the difference between a ruling elite and the average person, right?
Absolutely.
There's this oligarchy that kind of has taken over the country. And so we've got this managerial class that has taken over and they're legislating. So for Joe, it's about giving the country back to the people, because what we have forgotten is those people in DC work for us. We don't work for them, but they operate like we are the serfs. We're the servants. We're there to do whatever they need and to make sure we pay our taxes so they get paid for making us work for them, essentially, right? So the real idea is to say, hey, it's time to reduce government. It's time to give this nation back to the people, to preserve the rights to build your life the way you see fit, as long as it does not harm or destroy someone else's life, right? So that's Joe's number one. It is number two, the reduction of government, right? We hear a lot of candidates out there talking about we're going to get rid of all the alphabet agencies. So we're going to dump the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, DOJ, all these things. What's really unique, I think, when Joe says it, is it actually matters. Joe's entire life has been deconstructed by those alphabet agencies. And so he's lost his home. He's lost his legacy. He's lost his money. Joe has nothing to lose. So when he steps up to the plate, he's not trying to play ball in a system. He's literally operating from, these things destroyed my life. And if they can do it to me, they can do it to you. Somebody's got to be brave enough to step up there and make it happen. And then ultimately, Joe's there to fight for the average guy, the average American. With 330 plus million Americans running around here, there's a very tiny portion that don't look like everybody else. We're all happy to be paying a mortgage, raising kids with a partner in life, paying a car payment if we have to, but making a living wage, like being okay with just living life, not needing to achieve great things, not having to have massive wealth, just live life and have the things that we need to survive and be happy. Right. And I think it's returning this country. That's how we built this nation. We forget that people were happy to pay the mortgage on their 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, have a car in the driveway, have their kids, doing normal things in life, coaching baseball, basketball, football, those sorts of things, not having to work 2 and 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. And to really look at this nation and say, how do we return to those values and not make it about bigger, better, more, but rather peace and freedom and joy and happiness to just live your life the way you see fit.
Absolutely. Interesting thing that you touched on earlier when you talked about like some of the divides in this country, like black versus white, gay versus straight, all of those kind of like that infighting that happens. And I feel like all of that, like all of those kind of divides are just ways for folk who are really kind of in the same boat to fight each other and sink them. So the folks who are kind of in that ruling class, that elite class, they can focus on what they want to and maintain their power. Meanwhile, everyone at the bottom of the kind of like hierarchical chain is fighting amongst each other.
Absolutely. It's a distraction tactic, right?
Exactly.
So if I can get you to believe, I mean, look, I'm white, you're black. Like if they could get us arguing over skin color and not paying attention to our taxes and economics and freedoms and rights and all those other things, they can change things. They can move the needle, right? They can shift the freedoms in this country and work on something that isn't adjudicated, can't be governed by a law. It's interpersonal relationship, and this is something I've spent time in 91 countries. I've lived abroad. You see the same thing in other countries. The difference is you don't see the magnifying glass on certain issues, right? And so, and I don't listen, if we really want to get honest about all these little minute issues, race and sexuality or religion or all these things that tend to divide people, even politics, partisan politics,
Yeah,
they're
divide
still
and conquer.
using Republican and Democrat to divide this country, when all reality, we have one ruling class, a uniparty that sits in DC, and they all maybe say they're on a different team, but the truth is they're all conspiring in the same direction, right? So if they can get us caught up on all these things, because the truth is, whether it is division within a racial community or a sexual identity community or a religious community, there's still division even within those communities. And so, that was really something that I grew up in the South. So race is a, major thing growing up in the South, because it's still a predominant divide amongst the economics and the way life is, but not in the way that we're told. Like, it's just cultural divides. Like, we all separate by culture, right? Like, I don't go hang out with non-animal people. Like, if you're not an animal person, we're probably not going to be friends, because obviously I've got a lot of my life invested in this, and it controls a lot of my life, right? So there's a natural divide in that. But the interesting thing, when I was living abroad, I lived in a non-white nation. So to actually see racial division exist within a country that's predominantly one race that I'm not, you start to go, wait a minute. Oh yeah, this is human nature. This isn't actually a cultural issue. This is just human nature, and we can't adjudicate these things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, there's always going to be friction, and that's also the beauty of growing as people and as a culture and as a nation, is to also live in those tensions, right? But when we focus on basically, one of my mentors said to me a long time ago, Mike, is that some tensions do need resolved, but most tensions simply need to be managed, right? And that's up to us as individuals to manage a tension, right? So I think one of the things we've done in this country is we've tried to solve every tension versus manage those tensions, right? And so what's happened is DC and the ruling elite, and they may not be in DC because they may not be elected officials. It may be influential individuals with deep pockets who have a lot of influence over those things, right? And they've created this idea that we got to put all the pieces in place for life to be perfect, and we get caught up on finding that one missing puzzle piece, and we're not seeing the whole big picture that's happening out here in front of us. And so for Joe, it's like, hey, let's back up for a minute, take a 30,000 foot view, and realize, hey, we're actually a really good people. We're a really good country. We have a lot of great freedoms. We should be fighting together for the same things instead of fighting against each other for little things.
Absolutely, 100%. And so I know when I talked with Joe, we touched on it, and then we've touched on it a little bit too, and we talked about corruption in the justice system. So speak to that, and kind of what your stance is on that, and more importantly, how you all plan to address it if elected.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's an obvious two-tier justice system in this country, and it's between those with and those without. So if you don't have significant means, the justice system is not your friend. If you have means, the justice system works kind of the way it's supposed to. Right to an expedient trial, likelihood to not be charged with the maximum sentencing and different things like that. But if you have no means, you can't fight the system. The justice system in particular is so corrupt because it is a money generating system. It's just like kind of the war machine, right? If we can stay at war, if I can keep you in prison, I can keep getting funding, I can keep getting money, and privatized prisons are one of the biggest mess ups I think our country has ever done. Joe and I mean, obviously Joe's a part of that. He's got 14 months now that no one's touched his application for retrial and appeal on his own case. Because as long as he's a federal inmate, they're drawing at least $50,000 a year of federal funding just for him being present in the system. I know when I worked as a coach for my dogs are fighting. This is great. When I worked as a coach for entrepreneurs in the Kern Valley prison system in California for a while, when I was talking to the director of the Department of Corrections there, every inmate that was in that particular system generates $77,000 worth of income annually.
Oh, wow.
For the system, right? So you start to look at the number of people who are serving a 30-year sentence for carrying a dime bag of weed. And they're still serving that sentence in a state that now legalized the recreational use of marijuana. So you have to stop and ask yourself, why are we not readdressing these things? And the answer is really simple. It's not because there's too much to handle. The answer is there's too much money to give up.
Yeah.
And so
100%.
it's time for us to break down these systems across the board. And again, this same thought process exists, whether it's the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, the IRS, all these different places where we see that if you've got money and you can work the system and pay the right people and hire a lawyer or have right representation, you're not affected by the negative side of the system. If you're not, you become a money producing side of the system that they're not willing to give up. And so we always say, and Joe says it a lot, follow the money, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah,
exactly how
100%.
Joe ended up where he's at. I know when you've spoken to Joe before, I know he talks about, he's very vocal about it. Joe shouldn't even be there. You know, his entire case is a wrongful conviction. They didn't allow him to present his own evidence in the case. You know, the witnesses for the prosecution were paid off by federal agents, by producers of television shows, to create entertainment. And so all of this stuff was done and contorted. But once you've been stuck in the system and people forget, they think that because Joe is probably one of the most recognizable faces and names current in the last few years on the planet, not just in our nation, but on the planet. And I try to tell Joe this because people don't realize Joe's been in prison since before Tiger King happened. So Joe was already in the system before anybody knew who Joe was, unless you were an Oklahoman and you knew who Joe was if you're in Oklahoma. Joe doesn't even know how much of a big deal Joe is when he gets out. I'm like, bro, you're not even gonna be able to go to 7-Eleven, get a Slurpee and hide. Like, it is not going to work for you when you get out of there, right? But what people don't realize is that Joe, because he's a federal inmate, any revenue generated by such a worldwide sensation like Tiger King, Joe was never able to participate in that. Joe does not have the means. They took his home, they took the park, they took his animals, they took his legacy, they took any money that he had. Joe does not have the means. So he's on that side of the system where he does not have the means to fight against the system. So for Joe, running for office is about fighting, not just for himself, but for America, but also for us. All the things that we're doing right now is to point people towards Joe, to pay attention, to say, hey, if you've got a heart of compassion, let's fight. Because if we can get Joe on the other side of this system, Joe's a big enough voice to help us make a dent and a change and shift and move the needle for not just the Department of Justice, but for all the injustice that is continuing to happen in our country right now.
Absolutely. So given that Joe's currently incarcerated, obviously there's going to be people that hear about the fact that Joe's running for president while being incarcerated. And so there's going to be some people naturally that say, why the hell should I vote for Joe?
Right.
What do you say to that?
Well, I think they say it for two reasons. I mean, first of all, they know Joe's the loudmouth, crazy character from Tiger King, right? But they don't necessarily know Joe. Now, Joe is loudmouth and he is a little crazy, but he's a compassionate, loving man who's so brilliant, and he really sees people. And I think we got to get past the entertainment value, because obviously, like, folks who get shoved into reality television and characters and that kind of stuff, we don't get to see the real person. And so I know this person who's literally fighting for America. But the interesting thing is our Constitution and the laws that do govern this country support Joe being able to run for president as a federal inmate. And of course, his first action would be to self-pardon, because he will be able to do that and move himself out of the system. But for Joe, it's get me out of here so I can help the rest of America. And this is what I try to tell people is, you've got a lot of candidates that are coming to the table. Obviously, we're still early. We're about 18 months out, at this point, from a change in leadership in this country. But if you really stop and think about it, our current administration, I try to filter myself as much as possible. I'm not Joe. So I actually have a filter built in. Our current administration, I don't think, has the mental stability or capability of leading this country. I think that other Democratic candidates, I mean, there's some that just don't have a chance. RFK, I point people in the direction to say, listen, I actually like a lot of what he has to say. I agree with a lot of things that I hear come out of the man's mouth. There's things I don't. He's a green initiative, kill fossil fuels and all those sorts of things that I don't agree with. But here's the deal. The CIA killed his dad and killed his uncle. I mean, the CIA murdered his uncle who was president of the United States. The man has to have some agreement with somebody in the deep state to make sure he's not next in order to be able to go in there. So it makes me question. And I'm not saying that I know that for a fact. It just is a question I have to ask myself. When you look at candidates on the opposite side, I mean, Trump's the only other candidate I know that's going to go in ballsy enough and shake some things up. Maybe out of vengeance at this point, maybe it's just to prove you wrong kind of thing. Maybe not all from the great place, but he's got nothing to lose. He's not going for another term after it if he did get back into office. So I mean, I certainly I'm somewhat okay with that option. Of course, we're running on the Democratic ticket. These guys are running on the Republican. I know that your governor out of your state, if personal opinion, I think he's a deep state sellout. I think he's done some good things as the governor of Florida. Like I don't want to discredit him. I think he's been good as a leader. But the reality is I think when you look at his campaign and who he hired all of the legacy DC consultants to run his campaign. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Are you playing ball with the deep state, or are you trying to make a change? And so what I tell folks is look at Joe seriously, because while he may seem like a wild card, he's the average American guy who built his dream and was living his life on his freedoms. That's the kind of person that's supposed to be in the White House. That's the way we built this government to exist, is a fair representation of the people. And so when you look at the elite class that continues to rise to the top of the candidate pool, we forget we just need the average guy to show up and walk into DC and go, yeah, I don't think we need to be writing billions of dollars in checks to somebody else's war effort in another country. Maybe we should take care of our veterans here at home. Maybe we should protect our border. Maybe we should protect the rights of our own citizens and meet the needs of the homeless population, of the drug addicted, of the mentally afflicted and unstable in this country, because we have all the resources we need for it. But we're putting them in the wrong places, playing the elite game. And we need a normal guy who's going to go in and go, we ain't playing the elite game anymore. Don't care if it makes somebody mad, And truth is, we need a guy like Joe who has nothing to lose, because it's a thankless job and it's a costly job to step into that place and to call those shots and to have to move the ball down the field. And at this point, Joe's genuine heart from a real genuine place is, I don't have anything to lose. So let's go. Let's play ball, and let's get in there and let's take this nation back.
Awesome. So let's say the campaign is successful. Joe wins the presidency. So obviously, step one, self-pardon. After that, what does that first year look like? What are we trying to do?
Oh man, I think it'll be the wildest first year of an administration ever. I think that we're going to see media implode completely because they're not going to know what to do with it. I think we're going to see the system crumble. And I think it could be a very scary place for a lot of people. But because when you dismantle something, but I know that listen, for those of us in the animal space, I know this because it's very near and dear to Joe, is to wipe out the ridiculous governance laws that restrict the work that we do with these animals, because they're overbearing and they're wrong and they're misplaced. And the ESA and the AWA laws that protect all these animals aren't meant for these animals right here. And yet I'm governed by that, so it's changes to the USDA. Joe will tell you as fast and as quick as he's able to move it. The FBI is out. The CIA is out. The IRS is definitely on the chopping block. A reorganization of the Federal Reserve to allow the free economy to happen. And here's actually the biggest thing that I tell folks, and this is why I love Joe the way I do. Joe doesn't want to live in a blue ribbon society where everybody gets a free pass and everybody gets a winning meal ticket. It's time to just let the chips fall, which means for our nation, some things that have to fail. That may be that our economy suffers for a moment, not the way it's been suffering. See, we've been pressed by the economy. Sometimes the crash in the economy is the reset you need to make things even back up. And I think people don't realize that, right? We need inflation to crash. And in order to crash it, we need some other things to fall apart. We need some banks to fail. We need some things to come apart. So I think with Joe, he's not afraid to fail. So I think that's the biggest thing that people would see, is that somebody's willing to say, let's let it happen. And we will be here. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be here to put it back together. But we're going to do it as a nation. We're not going to do it with just a 500 elected officials sitting in a big round room in D.C. insulated from reality.
Right. All right, Michael. So to kind of sum it up, what would you say the top 3 takeaways for you have been throughout this process? Like, what have you learned?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, how important it is for us to just listen. And this is one thing I appreciate about Joe, is he's really listening to the American people. And, there's no better place for somebody like Joe to be listening than from where he actually sits today. Being in the federal system, being with people who have walked through the toughest end of our nation's process, to be able to listen and go, what are the needs? Because for Joe, it's understanding that when an inmate leaves the system, it's hard to get a job. It's hard to have the resources. It's hard to rebuild your life because the system is built to basically leave you in prison without the bars the rest of your life, right? So listening to that process for Joe has really opened his eyes to what this nation needs, right? So I think listening is a big key thing. The removal of fear. And I think this is a huge thing. We did not build this country on a bunch of weak, easily offended human beings who are worried about somebody else's opinion or thought process, but rather said, I believe so much in the core tenets of the freedom that we were given. Even at the risk of offense, I will fight. I will stand up and I will use my voice to speak for the freedom and the truth of the future of America. And that's what I respect about Joe is people think that it comes across as crass, but Joe's heart genuinely is, I will say what I feel the truth is and needs to be said, regardless of the offense, because if we don't speak the truth, we lose our voice and we aren't able to stand up and fight for freedom. So listening, courage, more than anything, and then the idea of just being unified under some basic things. It's not about unity on everything. There's no way in the world. Listen, I'm I have a spouse who's the most incredible person. We have a great life together. But are we unified on everything? No. Like, that's the beauty of a relationship. And that's what I love about Joe. Unity in this country shouldn't be focused on making sure everybody agrees on everything, but rather we agree on the right to live our lives how we want, love who we want, build our business, build our economics, and live without having to worry that someone's waiting to take it from us or squeeze us in that process. And so unified under those basic things that built this country to begin with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are some great takeaways and some great nuggets there. So before we get out of here, first of all, this has been an amazing interview. I really appreciate you taking the time to come chat with us and give us more information about Joe's campaign as well as yourself and kind of things that you all are fighting for and standing strong for. So I really appreciate you sharing all that with us. Before we get out of here, is there anything you want to tell our listeners? You want to shout out anything, tell them where they can find you on social media, things like that?
There's a couple of things that are really important for folks to go. I mean, they can go check out Joe's campaign, joeexotic2024.com. But at that same website, joeexotic2024.com/evidence, because I know a lot of people really don't know the truth about Joe's story because media is sensationalized and they continue to. Go check it out. Joe Exotic 2024-evidence. The videos are there. The testimonies there. The affidavits are there. The things that show you that what you think is true about Joe's story really isn't the truth. And the truth is right there in plain sight. And this is why we're fighting for justice. This is why we're fighting for a change. This is why we're fighting for a better America. So everything people really need to know, it's right there. And that's where they need to go check it out. And they can learn more about it. And of course, folks listening, if they want to ask questions, if they want to get in touch with Joe, we've got his address right there. People can write him a note. Don't assume that there's millions of people writing notes and Joe's got too much to handle. Joe loves it, and it's an encouragement to somebody who's in the position he's in today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're gonna drop the links for everything in the description of this video.
Love it.
So y'all make sure y'all go out there and check it out. And I appreciate everyone who stopped through on the channel to listen to this. I appreciate everybody who's following us on all the platforms. So definitely make sure you check this out. Go check out all of the links that we put in the description of the video and just learn more about Joe Exotic, learn more about everything that they are doing. Again, Michael, really appreciate you coming out and hanging out with us, getting us up to speed on everything. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. So again, thanks everyone. Thank y'all for coming out. Be blessed. Peace.